What if the woman everyone ignored was the only one who knew the truth? What if showing up to an ex-fiance's wedding was not about love or revenge, but about exposing a secret powerful enough to destroy an empire? And what if the real story only began after the wedding ended? The shock came on what should have been a perfect afternoon. The invitation lay on Alexander Cross's desk like a thin, sharpened blade, one that did not need to touch to draw blood. Just a white envelope, elegant black lettering, yet inside it carried a cold declaration. The woman who had once sworn to stand by him for life was about to marry another man, and she wanted him there to witness it. Alexander stood motionless in the glass office atop the headquarters of Cross and Vele. The city of San Aurelio stretched beneath him, afternoon light sliding across skyscrapers like molten metal. Here, he was the one who made decisions, the man who could move markets with a single call. And yet that fragile envelope tightened his chest, as if all his power had been quietly stripped away. Victoria Hale. Her name had never truly left his life, only been buried beneath successful deals and nights of relentless work. She had walked away at the exact moment he believed they had conquered everything. No explanation, no chance to fix what broke. And now she sent him a wedding invitation, a calculated reminder that she had moved on while he was meant to look like the one left behind. Alexander let out a faint laugh that never reached his eyes. He tossed the envelope onto the desk, hard enough for it to slide and stop just short of the edge, as if one more push would send everything crashing down. Marcus Reed walked in at that moment, glanced at the envelope, picked it up, and let out a low whistle. "That was a cruel move," he said. "Are you going to go?" "Go alone and look like a joke," Alexander replied flatly. "Not a chance." Marcus leaned back, studying the friend he had known since neither of them mattered to anyone. "Then don't go alone. Take someone with you. Show her you have moved on." The idea hung in the air, simple and dangerous. Alexander said nothing. Marcus was right, but taking just anyone would never be enough. Victoria was not the kind of woman shaken by cheap performances. If he showed up, he had to make her question everything, had to make her wonder. The afternoon slipped by in cold calculation. When Alexander finally left the building, the question still gnawed at him until he saw her. She sat on the sidewalk outside an upscale restaurant, golden light spilling through the windows behind her. Her clothes were worn and dirty, her dark hair tangled and loose over her shoulders. Yet her face stopped him, too sharp, too composed. Her eyes did not beg or plead. They challenged the world in silence as if it owed her an explanation. Alexander slowed, logic telling him to walk on, something far more reckless pulling him closer. He stopped in front of her, hands in his coat pockets. "Do you need money?" She looked up and there was no gratitude at all. Her gaze was sharp, assessing him from head to toe as though weighing his worth. One corner of her mouth lifted in a mocking smile. "Is this a social experiment?" she asked. "You ask that so you can decide whether to toss me a coin or walk away." Alexander paused. No one spoke to him like that. "Come with me to an event," he said, his voice lower now, "and I will pay you enough to change your life." She let out a quiet laugh and shook her head slowly. "Enough to change my life," she repeated. "Do you always use dramatic lines, or only when you want to sound like a savior?" The sarcasm unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "You just need to dress properly, smile, and come with me." She tilted her head, amusement flashing in her eyes. "So you want a decorative doll for the night?" His jaw tightened. "If you are not interested, I can find someone else." This time she laughed out loud. "Is that so? I do not see a line of candidates waiting around here." She stood, brushed dust from her dress, and stepped closer, close enough for him to see how unreadable her eyes were. "I will accept," she said, as if granting him a favor, "but only because I am curious." "Curious about what?" he asked. Her smile was calm and unsettling. "I want to see how far a man like you is willing to go." In that moment, Alexander Cross realized he had just opened a door he did not understand. And he had no idea that the woman the world had dismissed was about to become the force that would shatter everything he thought he controlled. The door of the black car closed with a heavy thud, cutting the woman off from the noisy world outside. Alexander Cross sat in the back seat, keeping just enough distance not to touch her, but not far enough to ignore her presence. The car began to move, streetlights reflecting on the window like cold streaks of light. She said nothing. She sat upright, her gaze fixed outside, observing the city of San Aurelio as if reading a familiar book. That calm unsettled Alexander. He was used to certain reactions when people stepped into his car: flattery, tension, nervous curiosity. She showed none of them. She was silent in the way of someone who did not feel inferior. "Do you not want to know where we are going?" Alexander asked, his voice even but sharp. She turned to look at him, a hint of mockery in her eyes. "Somewhere expensive," she replied. "Men like you do not do things halfway." Alexander raised an eyebrow. That was not the answer of someone who lived on the margins. It was the conclusion of someone who had once belonged to his world. "And you are not afraid?" he asked. "You do not seem like the type who creates pointless danger," she said, turning back to the window. "If I am wrong, then I accept the risk." Her words made his jaw tighten. She was speaking to him as an equal, perhaps even as the one judging. The car stopped in front of a building made of glass and marble, white light pouring out with arrogant confidence. This salon was not meant for passersby. Alexander stepped out first by habit, adjusting his collar. When he turned back, she had already stepped out on her own, without hesitation, without needing his hand. Inside, the staff recognized him immediately, respectful glances and practiced smiles appearing at once. "I want a complete transformation," Alexander said without hesitation. "Hair, makeup, clothes, everything." She was led to a large chair in front of the mirror. Under the lights, Alexander finally saw her more clearly. She was not delicate beautiful. Her beauty was sharp, layered, forged by impact. "If you are having second thoughts," she said as the stylist began touching her tangled hair, "now is the time." "Second thoughts about what?" he asked. "About taking me with you," she replied. "I am not easy to control." Alexander crossed his arms. "I have never needed to control anyone." She closed her eyes, her voice calm. "People who say that are usually the ones who control everything." The words left him silent. When she spoke again, softer but precise, he felt something slip out of his grasp. "I have lived in this world before." Before he could ask anything, the salon manager politely guided him to the waiting area. Time moved slowly. Alexander watched his coffee grow cold, his mind circling one question. Who was she? When the door finally opened again, he stood up instinctively, then stopped. The woman walking toward him was no longer the one he had seen on the sidewalk. Her hair was perfectly styled, her skin luminous, her sharp features enhanced by refined makeup. The dress fit her with confidence, not excess. Yet what truly stunned him was not the transformation. It was her eyes, calm, familiar, as if she had simply returned to a place that had always been hers. "You look surprised," she said. "You are not?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "No, I am just remembering." She took her handbag and walked past him, leaving Alexander standing still. In that moment, he realized he'd invited an unknown force into the game, and deep down he began to understand that this woman had never come to be anyone's background. The car pulled away from the salon, but the atmosphere inside had completely changed. Alexander Cross leaned back in his seat, his hands loosely clasped, his gaze drifting to the reflection in the window. The woman sitting across from him was no longer the one the world had ignored on a sidewalk. She now belonged effortlessly to the polished silence of luxury, so composed that the elegance around her seemed unnecessary. Alexander waited for a reaction, a question, a flicker of uncertainty. But there was nothing. "What is your name?" he finally asked, his voice low and direct. She turned to him without hesitation. "Elena," she said. That is enough. He did not like the answer, not because of the name, but because of the finality in her tone, as if she had decided how much of herself he was allowed to know. "The wedding is at the Imperial Cove Hotel," he said, reminding her of the arrangement. "There will be many people. People you know," she replied, "and people who do not know me." "You are not worried?" he asked. "Worry is a luxury," she said calmly, looking back out the window. "Only those with much left to lose can afford it." The words struck him in a way he did not expect. He studied her more closely, the straight posture, relaxed shoulders, the sharp yet unguarded gaze. This was not the presence of someone handed an unexpected opportunity. It was the presence of someone who had once stood very high, fallen very far, and learned how to remain steady anywhere. The car stopped in front of the hotel where Alexander had arranged for her to stay, A private suite overlooking the sea, discreet and secure, far from curious eyes. He stepped out with her and entered the grand lobby, marble floors reflecting the lights like water. The receptionist greeted him with a respectful nod and handed over the key without questions. "You will stay here until the event is over," Alexander said, passing the card to Elena. "If you need anything, say so." She took it, her fingers brushing his for a brief moment. "Do you always prepare everything this carefully?" she asked. "I prepare so I am not surprised," he replied. She smiled slightly, just enough to make him feel seen. "That is unfortunate," she said. "The most memorable things usually come from surprises." She turned and walked toward the elevator, leaving Alexander standing in the lobby, feeling for the first time that a carefully calculated plan was beginning to drift off course. He was not sure whether to feel irritated or intrigued. The evening passed slowly. In his temporary office at the hotel, Alexander reviewed schedules, guest lists, familiar faces that would appear at the wedding. Everything was predictable, every reaction anticipated, except one. The image of Elena standing before the salon mirror replayed in his mind. Not her appearance, but her eyes. The eyes of someone who did not need validation to know who she was. Meanwhile, Elena stood alone by the window of her suite, looking down at the darkening sea. Lights from distant boats flickered like fragments of old memories. She removed her heels and placed them neatly beside the bed, then sat on the edge, her hands tightening briefly as if holding something invisible. She opened her handbag and took out a small disposable phone. The screen glowed in the dim room. Elena typed a few lines, paused, then sent a short message. He took the bait. The reply came almost immediately. "Then be careful. This game is not for those who hesitate." Elena turned off the screen and leaned back, her reflection staring at her from the mirror, calm and controlled, yet deep in her eyes burned a fire that had never gone out. Tomorrow's wedding was not just a social event. It was a doorway back to the past, and this time, Elena was not coming to stand on the sidelines. On another floor of the same hotel, Alexander Cross stood by his own window, staring toward the same stretch of sea. He did not know that they were thinking of the same thing. Tomorrow, under bright lights and polished smiles, a woman the world had underestimated would step inside, and everything he and the elite around him believed to be certain was about to be turned upside down. The morning of the wedding arrived with an unusual stillness, as if the city of San Aurelio were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Sunlight poured through the tall glass windows of the Imperial Cove Hotel, reflecting off the deep blue sea in the distance, creating a scene so perfect it felt almost artificial. Alexander Cross stood before the mirror in his room, adjusting his tie with practiced precision. Everything was exactly as it should be: the custom-tailored suit, the expensive watch, the composed presence of a man who never allowed cracks to show. Yet beneath the flawless exterior, something felt off, a quiet, unfamiliar sense of anticipation. He was not thinking about Victoria, and that realization unsettled him. On another floor, Elena stood in front of the mirror in her private suite. The dress prepared for her hung neatly nearby, understated in color, elegant in cut, not designed to shout, but impossible to ignore. She slipped into it slowly, each movement deliberate, as if carrying meaning. When the zipper closed, she met her own reflection. The woman staring back was no longer the invisible figure from the streets, nor entirely the fallen heiress of the past. She was both, fused into something sharper, more dangerous. When Elena stepped out of the private elevator reserved for VIP guests, the Imperial Cove ballroom glowed with light. Gowns shimmered, tailored suits moved with confidence. Soft laughter floated through the air, every smile carefully calculated. This was a world where handshakes carried more weight than promises, where nothing was accidental. Alexander saw her instantly. Not because she stood out loudly, but because she moved with a confidence that felt innate, as if this space had once belonged to her. He walked toward her and extended his hand out of social instinct. Elena placed her hand in his without hesitation. In that moment, a tension rippled outward, subtle yet unmistakable. Eyes turned, whispers followed. Who was she, and why was she here with Alexander Cross? Elena felt it all and showed nothing. Her back straight, chin lifted slightly, expression calm. Alexander leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Let me lead." She glanced at him, the faintest curve at her lips. Did you bring me here to make me invisible, or to make sure someone cannot look away? He did not answer. The truth in her words struck closer than he expected. They had not gone far when a hush moved through the room. Victoria Hale appeared at the far end of the hall. Her wedding gown fit her flawlessly, her radiant smile polished to perfection. At her side stood Nathan Hale, composed, respectable, exactly the kind of man her family approved of. Victoria's gaze swept the room, then stopped. For a brief moment, her smile faltered, subtle but real. Alexander noticed, and so did Elena. Victoria looked at Alexander, surprise flickering in her eyes, then her gaze shifted to Elena. Something deeper than curiosity surfaced, a sense of recognition that made her uneasy, as if an old memory had been disturbed. Alexander guided Elena directly toward them. Victoria, he said calmly, his tone cool. Alexander, she replied, recovering her perfect smile. I did not expect you to come. I always honor an invitation, he said, resting his hand lightly on Elena's back. And I did not come alone. Victoria turned to Elena, assessing her carefully. We have not met. I am Victoria. Elena smiled and extended her hand before Alexander could speak. Elena, a pleasure to meet you. Her voice was steady, refined, her posture flawless. There was no trace of submission. Victoria hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking her hand, her expression darkening slightly. You look familiar, Victoria said, almost without meaning to. Elena tilted her head, her smile unchanged. Do I? Perhaps this world is smaller than we think. The words were gentle, but they landed like a stone dropped into still water. The tension spread quietly, sharp and unmistakable. The wedding had not yet begun, but the game already had. And this time, Elena was not merely entering the ballroom. She was stepping into someone else's past, with the calm certainty of a woman who knew exactly what she carried with her. The atmosphere in the ballroom continued to move as expected, yet an invisible fracture had formed the moment Elena withdrew her hand after shaking Victoria's. Smiles remained in place, the music flowed softly, but the balance had shifted, and the first person to feel it was Victoria Hale. She turned away quickly, just fast enough to hide the flicker of unease in her eyes. Nathan leaned in to say something lighthearted, a familiar social remark, but Victoria barely heard him. Her mind was fixed on Elena's face, on that calm voice, and on the unsettling sense of familiarity creeping in like an old wound being touched. Alexander guided Elena away from the center of the room, leading her deeper into the reception. You did not have to do that, he said quietly. His voice meant only for her. Do what? Elena asked, her gaze drifting over clusters of guests. Be so forward, he replied. You are making her uneasy. Elena smiled faintly. You did not bring me here to stand still. Alexander did not argue. He realized then that he had underestimated her. Elena was not waiting to be led. She was carving her own path, right in the middle of someone else's territory. They stopped near the bar as a few businessmen recognized Alexander and approached. Polite handshakes exchanged in quick succession. Elena stood beside him, silent at first, observing. When introduced, she offered a brief nod, neither distant nor eager to impress. Yet after only a few short responses, the expressions of those around her shifted. What field are you in, Elena? One man asked, curiosity edging his voice. I observe markets, she replied, especially the ones people tend to underestimate. The man laughed, but Alexander caught the trace of uncertainty beneath it. Elena spoke little, yet every word carried weight. She knew when to stop, when to leave space for others to think. That was not a skill learned overnight. From across the room, Victoria watched. She stood among friends and family, her smile flawless, but her eyes kept drifting back to Alexander and the woman beside him. Elena was not trying to draw attention, yet attention found her anyway. That unsettled Victoria more than any display ever could. Who is she? Victoria murmured to a close friend, her voice low. I do not know, the woman answered, but she does not look like someone brought along for appearances. Victoria tightened her grip on her glass. Not like the others. That was exactly the problem. Elena was unlike any woman Alexander had ever brought to social events. She did not need him to exist in that space. And suddenly, despite being the bride, Victoria felt her own position turned fragile. Alexander noticed her stare and leaned closer to Elena. You are making her uncomfortable. No, Elena said calmly. I am simply existing. The words drew a soft laugh from him, but beneath it stirred something else, admiration mixed with caution. Elena did not attack directly. She stood in the right place, spoke the right words, and let everything else unravel on its own. The music shifted tempo, couples moving toward the dance floor. Alexander looked at Elena, waiting. She caught it. "Are you afraid?" she asked quietly. "Of what?" "Of bringing me into the light even more." He extended his hand. "Dance with me." Elena placed her hand in his, slower this time, deliberate, considered. As they stepped onto the floor, eyes turned once again. Victoria turned fully toward them now, no longer hiding her attention. Beneath the low rhythm of the music, Alexander murmured, "You know exactly what you are doing." "I do," Elena replied, meeting his gaze. "And soon, so will she." Across the room, Victoria stood frozen as unease rose sharply within her. An old instinct she had once ignored was pounding at the door. That woman had not appeared by chance. And if Victoria did not understand why, then tonight was only the beginning of a loss she would no longer be able to control. The music continued to flow through the ballroom, but for Alexander Cross, every sound seemed to fade into the distance. When the dance ended, he guided Elena away from the floor with a feeling he could not quite name. She had done exactly what he needed, yet far more than he had planned, and that was something he could not ignore. "You are far more familiar with this world than I expected," Alexander said, as they stopped in a quieter corner, his voice low, no longer cold. Elena met his gaze. "Who did you think I was?" He did not answer. That was the question gnawing at him since they had left the salon. Elena was not pretending to blend in. She blended in too perfectly. There was not a single wasted movement, not a single misstep. As if she had once stood in rooms like this before, understood the unspoken language of glances and silences. Across the room, Victoria had regained her composure. She smiled, chatted, raised her glass in celebration, yet Alexander saw the difference. She was no longer relaxed. Her eyes kept searching, measuring. Elena had planted a question in Victoria's mind, and it was not one that could be easily erased. When the ceremony officially began, Alexander led Elena to the section reserved for honored guests. The speeches echoed with formality, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He focused on the woman beside him, her posture straight, her hands resting lightly on her lap, her expression calm, as if this were nothing more than an ordinary gathering. After tonight, Alexander said quietly, "Everything ends. You take the money and return to your life." Elena did not look at him right away. "Are you sure?" she asked. "That is the agreement." She smiled faintly. Some agreements do not end that easily. A chill ran through him, not because of a threat, but because her words carried a truth he had not yet faced. Elena did not see tonight as a performance. To her, it was a step in something far longer. The reception ended in applause and congratulations. As guests began to leave, Alexander escorted Elena back to the car. San Aurelio glittered at night, but inside the vehicle the atmosphere was heavier than when they arrived. "You will stay at the hotel a few more days," Alexander said. "I have arranged it." "You do not need to do that," Elena replied. "I do not like unanswered questions." She turned to him, her eyes darkening. "Then you are not going to like me." That response kept Alexander awake all night. The next morning he sat in his office staring at the glowing screen before him. The investigator he had hired had sent a preliminary report, and it was nearly empty. The name Elena, no last name, no fixed address, no financial records, no medical history, no significant transaction trail. As if she had never existed in any system. Alexander leaned back in his chair, unease spreading through him. In his world, everyone left traces. Even those who wanted to disappear could never erase everything. Elena was different. She felt like a deliberate void. He picked up the phone. "Check again," he told the investigator. "I want everything, even the smallest detail." "It may take time," came the reply. "I am not in a hurry," Alexander said, "but I do not accept nothing." Meanwhile, back at the hotel, Elena sat alone in her suite, staring out at the sea. She held a glass of water without drinking it. The disposable phone lay on the table, its screen dark. She had always known Alexander would investigate. She closed her eyes briefly and took a slow breath. The past was no longer something she could keep hidden. The door had opened the moment she stepped into the ballroom, and now there was no turning back. Across the city, Victoria Hale stood before the mirror in her dressing room, removing each piece of jewelry with sharp, deliberate movements. The wedding was over, but the unease remained. She replayed Elena's eyes, her voice, that terrifying sense of recognition. This is not a coincidence, Victoria whispered to herself. She did not come here just because of Alexander. A decision formed quickly. Victoria picked up her phone and dialed a number she had not used in a long time. I need you to find someone, she said. Her name is Elena. I want to know who she is, immediately. Somewhere in the glowing city, two investigations began at the same time, and Elena, sitting quietly in her silent room, stood at the very center of a storm about to take shape. The next morning, the city of San Aurelio woke to its familiar rhythm, but for Alexander Cross, everything felt misaligned. He sat in his office, the coffee on his desk long gone cold, his eyes fixed on his phone as if staring hard enough might force the answers to appear. His entire life had been built on clarity, numbers that made sense, reports that mapped every step people took. Elena was different. She was a void that felt intentional, and he could not ignore it. The phone vibrated. Alexander answered immediately. I found it, the investigator said, his voice steady this time. It was not easy, but I managed to connect the pieces. Alexander stood up. Go on. There was a brief pause, as if the weight of the truth required caution. Elena is not her full name. Her real name is Elena Rowe, daughter of Richard Rowe. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Richard Rowe. Alexander knew the name well. No one in investment or construction circles did not. Richard Rowe had once been powerful, then destroyed overnight by a massive financial scandal. He is dead, Alexander said slowly, after the bankruptcy. That is correct, the investigator replied, and that is only the surface. The scandal was not a simple failure. It was a setup, and one name keeps appearing in the old records. Alexander already knew it before it was spoken. Victoria Hale. The call ended, but Alexander remained frozen in place. The final pieces slid into position, forming a picture that sent a chill through him. Elena had not appeared by chance. She had not agreed to go with him out of curiosity or for money. She knew exactly who he was, and she knew where she was walking into. At the same time, at the hotel, Elena stood by the window, sunlight touching her face without softening the tension in her eyes. A knock sounded at the door, slow and deliberate. She did not need to open it to know who it was. Alexander stepped inside and closed the door behind him. No pleasantries, no hesitation. Your name is Elena Rowe, he said. Your father was Richard Rowe. Elena closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them, the calm returned, but without any disguise. So you know. Victoria destroyed your family, Alexander continued. Last night was not a coincidence. Elena turned to face him. The mockery was gone from her eyes, replaced by a coldness shaped by years of endurance. My father trusted her, Elena said evenly. He believed she was a strategic partner. She used his name to hide illegal deals. When everything collapsed, he became the one to take the blame. Alexander said nothing. Elena moved slowly across the room, each word drawn from memories long buried. We lost everything. Our home, our reputation, our friends. My father could not bear it. He died before he ever had the chance to clear his name. She paused and took a steady breath. My mother did not last much longer. The space between them grew heavy. A cold anger rose in Alexander, no longer tied to Victoria as his former fiancée, but as someone who had destroyed an entire family. And you, he asked. You disappeared. Elena nodded. It was the only way to survive, to wait for the moment I could return. She met his gaze. And you were the fastest way back in. He should have been angry, should have felt used. Instead, he felt a sharp, unsettling clarity. What are you planning to do next? Take back what was stolen, Elena said, and make Victoria Hale face the truth. Alexander stepped closer. You cannot do that alone. Elena looked at him, something flickering in her eyes. I have always been alone. Not anymore, Alexander said, more certain than he expected. If you are walking into a war, I will not let you do it by yourself. In that moment, an alliance was formed, not out of romance, but out of shared understanding and shared fury. Elena turned away, hiding the surge of emotion rising inside her. She had waited a long time for this moment, and now the real game was finally beginning. Chapter 8 began with a blow that came without warning. Just 2 days after the wedding, the name Elena Rowe appeared across financial outlets and elite entertainment pages in San Aurelio. The headlines were carefully crafted, never accusing her directly, yet sharp enough to plant doubt. The daughter of a disgraced tycoon, vanished from high society, suddenly reappearing at the side of Alexander Cross. The language was subtle, poisonous, hinting at motives, ambition, and a questionable past. There was no solid proof, only fragments arranged to let readers reach the worst conclusions on their own. Alexander read article after article in his office, his hands tightening until his knuckles turned white. He knew this game well. Victoria never attacked head-on. She used public opinion, the toxic curiosity of high society, to erode a person's credibility piece by piece. It was a familiar strategy, and it worked. Elena was calmer than he expected. She sat across from him, scrolling through the articles on a tablet, her expression unchanged. "She is testing my reaction," Elena said. "If I panic, she wins." "You should not have to deal with this," Alexander replied, his voice low. "I can shut it down right now." Elena shook her head. "Not yet. If you act now, she will know we are getting close." Alexander hated being forced to wait, but he knew she was right. This was not just a media battle, it was bait. At the same time, a new figure entered the picture. Julian Moreau, a European investor with a sharp reputation and a smile that never reached his eyes, appeared at a major business event in San Aurelio. Elena attended as a representative of a new consulting project, a strategic move Alexander had helped arrange. Julian noticed her immediately, not because of the press, but because of how she carried herself, how she spoke, and her rare self-possession. "You are nothing like what they write," Julian said as they stood near the bar. "The press rarely writes the truth," Elena replied calmly. Julian smiled, intrigued, and invited her to dance. Just a polite social dance. Elena hesitated for only a moment before nodding. She knew all eyes were on her, and she also knew one gaze mattered more than the rest. Alexander watched from across the room as they moved on the dance floor. The way Julian's hand rested at Elena's waist, careful yet intentional. The way Elena maintained a precise distance without retreating. A sharp, burning discomfort rose in Alexander, faster and stronger than he expected. He had believed their connection was a rational alliance, but his body betrayed him. When the music ended, Alexander did not wait. He walked straight toward them. "Elena," he said, tension clear in his voice, "I need to speak with you." Julian raised an eyebrow and offered a polite smile. "It seems I'm taking up too much of your time." "Yes," Alexander replied coldly. Elena took Alexander's hand and pulled him toward a quiet hallway. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. "He is not interested in business," Alexander said. "He is targeting you. And that bothers you," Elena replied, locking her gaze onto his. Alexander fell silent. The silence was answer enough. "I do not belong to you," Elena said clearly. "We agreed on that." "I know," Alexander replied, "but I hate the idea of seeing you in someone else's arms." The next moment happened too quickly for reason to intervene. Alexander pulled Elena close and kissed her. The kiss was fierce and impulsive, filled with tension, restraint, and everything left unspoken. For a brief second, Elena responded, instinct overpowering control. Then she pushed him away. "Do not," she said, her breath unsteady. "This does not change anything." Elena turned and walked off, leaving Alexander alone in the hallway, the weight of lost control pressing hard against his chest. He had crossed a line he himself had drawn, and he did not know whether he regretted it. Elsewhere in the city, Victoria Hale reviewed the latest reports, her lips curving into a thin smile. She had seen the images of Elena dancing with Julian, had seen Alexander's reaction. "Good," Victoria murmured. "Let them destroy each other." What she did not realize was that the game she had started was slipping beyond her control, because Elena Rowe was no longer a woman who only endured, and Alexander Cross, though he had not fully admitted it yet, was ready to risk far more than his reputation to protect the woman standing at the center of the storm. The storm Victoria Hale had unleashed did not fade, it simply changed direction. In the days following the event with Julian, the pressure around Elena intensified. Invitations were quietly withdrawn. Calls that once came without pause suddenly stopped. A few partners began to keep their distance, not hostile, just cautious, as if her presence carried an invisible risk. Victoria did not need to appear. She only had to plant enough doubt for others to step back on their own. Alexander saw it all, and his anger was no longer hidden. "She is suffocating the space around you," he said, his voice low and rigid. This is no longer a warning. Elena stood by the window of her temporary office, looking down at the traffic below. She is losing patience, Alina replied. And when Victoria loses patience, she makes mistakes. Alexander turned to her. You already have a plan. Alina nodded, and it is time to end this. The trap was set quickly, but with enough elegance that Victoria could not resist. A private gathering at the Harrington Club, where San Aurelio's elite met when they wanted conversations that would never reach the press. The invitation was sent under the guise of an exclusive investment meeting, limited to a select few, and Elena Rowe's name was, of course, on the list. It is a trap, Alexander said when he read it. I know, Elena replied, and she knows I will come. Alexander was silent for a long moment. This time, I will not stay out of it. The night of the gathering, the Harrington Club glowed under warm lights. Elena arrived alone, wearing a simple black dress that was sharp without excess. No elaborate jewelry, no need to display power. Every step she took carried a calm that was almost unsettling. Eyes turned toward her again, curious, wary, judgmental. Victoria appeared not long after, confident smile in place, her gaze cold. She walked toward Elena, a glass in hand. I'm glad you came, Victoria said. I thought you might avoid me. Elena replied evenly. I do not run. Victoria's lips curved slightly. I hope you are getting used to attention. San Aurelio is not forgiving. Elena met her eyes. I am not here to ask for forgiveness. The tension tightened around them. A few people nearby slowed their movements, pretending to chat while clearly listening. Victoria leaned in, lowering her voice. Do you think you have won? Elena did not answer right away. She reached into her handbag and placed a thin envelope on the table beside them. I think it is time you stop pretending. Victoria glanced at it and gave a dismissive smile. Another scare tactic. I have seen many. Then you should open it, Elena said. Victoria hesitated for a brief moment, long enough for Elena to know she had struck the right nerve. When Victoria opened the envelope, the color drained from her face. Inside were copies of contracts, signatures, transaction notes, and a transcript of recorded conversations, every word impossible to deny. You used my father's name to hide fraudulent deals, Elena said, her voice calm but sharp. Did you really think I kept no evidence? Victoria clenched the papers. You will not dare release this, she whispered. You will destroy yourself. No, Elena replied. You will. Alexander stepped in beside her at that moment. By tomorrow morning, he said coldly, every piece of this will be delivered to the press and the prosecutors. Victoria took a half step back. For the first time, her confidence truly cracked. You cannot do this, she said, her voice shaking. You already did, Elena replied, to my family. The space around them seemed to freeze. Then the large doors of the Harrington Club swung open. 2 police officers entered, followed by a prosecutor. Conversation stopped. The music cut off. Victoria Hale, one officer announced. You are under arrest on charges of financial fraud, embezzlement, and market manipulation. The glass slipped from Victoria's hand and shattered on the marble floor. She turned toward Alexander, then Elena, her eyes filled with panic and hatred. This is not over, she hissed. Elena stepped closer, her voice low enough for only Victoria to hear. For you, it ended a long time ago. As Victoria was handcuffed and led away under the stunned gaze of the elite, Elena stood still, her breathing finally slowing. A chapter of her life had closed, not with noise, but with the truth finally spoken aloud. Silence after a storm always arrives more slowly than expected. In the days following Victoria Hale's arrest, San Aurelio shifted in tone. News outlets ran constant updates, each hidden connection exposed, each shadowed transaction brought into the light. Names once protected by Victoria hurried to disappear, erasing traces, pretending they had never existed. The empire she built on manipulation and deceit collapsed so quickly that many barely understood how it happened. Elena Rowe did not appear before the press. She did not need to. The truth spoke for her. The released documents were clear enough to leave no doubt about who had orchestrated the tragedy years ago. Her father's name was finally cleared, too late to hear an apology. But for Elena, what mattered was that the Rowe name was no longer tied to disgrace. One morning, Elena stood alone in her new apartment, sunlight pouring through wide windows. No hotel room, no performance, just her and a life returned to her. She placed a hand over her chest and took a deep breath, feeling a lightness she had not known in years. Revenge did not bring the satisfaction people imagined, but justice brought peace. Alexander Cross stood behind her, watching quietly. Since everything ended, one question had stayed with him. What would happen when Elena no longer needed him? "What do you want to do next?" he asked, breaking the stillness. Elena turned to him. The defenses were gone. The sharp coldness softened. She was simply a woman who had endured too much. "I want to rebuild," she said. "Not to prove anything, just to live up to what I'm capable of." Alexander nodded. "I want to help you." Elena smiled faintly. "This time, not because you owe me anything, right?" "No," he replied, "because I believe in you." Weeks later, Elena Rowe officially launched a new strategic consulting firm. Quietly, without spectacle, but enough to draw the attention of those who understood what it meant. Alexander did not put his name on it. He stayed behind the scenes, just as he promised. No control, no ownership, only support when needed. Their relationship did not move quickly. There were no rushed promises, only long evenings talking about things they had never dared to admit, quiet breakfasts and moments of silence that no longer felt heavy. They both understood that what they were building required time, and this time neither of them was in a hurry. One late evening, as city lights shimmered below, Elena stood on the balcony, watching the movement beneath them. Alexander stepped beside her. "If I had not stopped that day," he said slowly, "do you think things would have been different?" Elena considered it. "Maybe," she replied, "but I would have come back anyway, just by another path." Alexander looked at her, his gaze steady. "I have no regrets." Elena turned and lightly touched his hand. "Neither do I. There was no more war, no more enemies, only two people once underestimated, once broken, now standing on the ground of truth and choosing to move forward together." Elena and Alexander's story did not end with revenge, but with freedom. Freedom from the past, freedom from judgment, and freedom to choose a different future. If you stayed with this story until the end, leave a comment and share your thoughts. Do you think Elena made the right choice? Do you believe Alexander truly changed? Do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you do not miss our next stories, where those once overlooked create the most powerful turning points. Before you go, take a moment to reflect on this story. Elena and Alexander's journey is not just about revenge or justice. It is about resilience, choice, and the quiet strength it takes to reclaim your life when the world has already judged you. Sometimes the most underestimated people carry the deepest scars and the greatest power, and sometimes the loudest victories are the ones achieved without applause. If this story made you feel something, whether anger, hope, or inspiration, do not keep it to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your perspective matters more than you think. Let us know which moment stayed with you the most, and whether you believe true freedom comes from justice, forgiveness, or simply moving forward. If you enjoy stories where hidden strength rises and truth eventually finds its voice, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next story, because the next one might challenge the way you see the people around you. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for staying until the end. Your support keeps these stories alive.